Well, hello. Thanks for coming back to check out another video. So, we are here today I was about to say rank eyeshadow palettes. That's not what we are here to do. I think that would be an undertaking, although I am toying with the idea of ranking my eyeshadow palettes by brand. However, what you are here today is to see my top 3 picks per category for eyeshadow. I feel like that's kind of a ranking, but it's a little bit easier because we're talking about things like color story or drugstore or indie or high-end, things like that. I do want to say I got this idea from Angelica Nyqvist, so I'm going to link her channel and her video down below. However, I don't know if she's the one that this truly originated from. So if you have done something like this yourself, or you know of someone who did it before her or anything like that, leave it down in the comments. That way we can all look and see and go and find more content that is like this. I just really enjoyed her version of this and thought it was just a fun way to sit down and chat about your eyeshadow palettes and show you some top favorites without the stress of ranking them all. So if that sounds good to you, then we will jump right on into this. Alright, so I also forgot to say, I'm going to leave those timestamps or chapters within the video by category so that you can skip around. Feel free to oh, I'm not interested in Haley's picks for her top 3 neutrals, but I want to see what she says for Colourful. So that will be down there for your, discretion to use. I don't even know what I'm trying to say. Okay, so let's just kick it off with my top 3 neutral palettes that are within my collection. So the first one I will show you is the Persona Identity palette. I have the old school packaging and it's so beat up and grubby. And to be quite honest, I'm going to show you what this palette looks like on the inside, but I'm going to have to pop up a picture of what it looks like brand new because I have some shadows missing that I've finished off. I've hit pan in some shades. So I think you can tell this is definitely one of my most loved neutral palettes. So hopefully over here on the screen, I'll have a picture of it brand new for you. Anyway, this is just a really good, nice, cool tone palette. I feel like you can get a lot of everyday looks out of this. It's so effortless. The formula of this is super nice and easy to work with. And a lot of these shades are very complementary to each other. And I love the fact that this palette has the lighter shimmers and it does have darker shimmers so you can dip your toes into that. But yeah, this palette doesn't really take a lot of effort in that sense. It's one of those where you can just sit down and kind of mindlessly put on your makeup and it's still going to look really good, really put together. So that is definitely one reason why it is one of my top 3 favorite neutral palettes. Alright, so my next favorite neutral palette, now I'm not ranking these by category, it's not oh, the Persona one is my number 1 and then this one's my number 2 and this one's my number 3. It's just my top 3. Hopefully that makes sense. But the second one I will show you actually comes from Colourpop. So this is the Limoncello palette. If I'm not mistaken, they came out with this sometime in the summer of 2021, I believe. So this is what this palette looks like on the inside. The only thing I will say that I don't like is the pop of blue down here because like I've said before, this blue is a very nice blue, but it doesn't really go with a lot of the other colors in this palette. It kind of turns into a green when you play with the yellow, of course, and then when you use some of these darker brown shades, it becomes kind of muddy. So the blue on its own is fine, but just not within this palette. But this still is a really nice to me it's a neutral palette, but I feel like it's a fun neutral palette. It has some interesting colors within the shimmer shades that they have given you, especially this green and this yellow here. They're just really pretty, and I feel like this is the perfect palette for someone who really loves neutrals, loves to play around with only neutrals, but kind of wants to experiment and maybe incorporate some softer color into their life. You don't want those bright, bold, colorful mattes, but you're open to playing with colorful shimmers, then I think this would be a really good palette. And the formula of this is quite nice. I feel like Colourpop is kind of hit and miss with some of their releases, but the Limoncello is one of their better made palettes in my opinion. Alright, so then my last top neutral palette to show you comes from Juvia's Place. So this is the Warrior, the original Naked Honey. So that's what I affectionately like to call it. Now the background of this is super reflective, so very sorry. I don't know, hopefully the camera can register this, but this is just a great 9-pan palette if you love those honey brown and honey yellow types of colors. You're gonna get everything you will need within this palette. And even though these two matte shades are, like this one's more of a mid-tone brown and then this one is like a darker brown, I still feel like I can come into this palette and create a full-on look by itself. So like I'll just go in with a light hand with this shade in my crease, use this to deepen up my outer V, and then whatever shimmer shade that I want. And if I get a little too ham with this brown shade, I'll use like the creamy color to help blend that out and like soften it a little bit. So even though there's only 3 mattes, I feel like you can still do a lot with this palette and make a lot of really pretty looks. So yeah, this has some of my favorite like taupey kind of golden shades in it, especially this one down here at the bottom. It's just so pretty. So yeah, I can't rave about this one enough either. Alright, so since we just did neutrals, it makes sense to talk about your colorful palettes, right? So I do have my top 3 colorful palettes in front of me. So the first one I will show you is the Cake palette by Glamlight. I will tell you, this is not a palette that I think I would have bought for myself. Laura ended up buying this and then I don't think she liked it all that much. I don't think it was nothing against the formula. I think it was more that she just didn't want another rainbow palette. I could be totally mistaken. But she sent this to me, which was so nice of her. And now that I have it, I can't imagine not having it, if that makes sense. This is truly just a great rainbow palette. I really like the Glamlight formula. I will say their shimmer shadows, you definitely need to either spray your brush or have like a sticky base in order to get them to really show up. But their matte shadows blend out so nicely. I don't find that they're patchy and you're able to build them. So like one good thing about this palette that I like is you can go in with some of these like lighter matte shades and then take one of the like darker mattes and deepen it up and really take that gradient or make that gradient effect like I've told you guys I like to do. So yeah, this has just been a fun palette. This is the only rainbow palette that I need in my life, to be quite honest, because it has everything I could ever want. And I also love how within here, minus like the green, there's only this one matte green. I wish there was a green shimmer within this palette. So other than that though, there does seem to be like, you know, you have like the matte yellow and then the shimmer yellow and you've got like this orange and then the shimmer. So I like that you could also, if you wanted to, create some really nice like monochromatic type looks, and that this palette, the way it's like laid out to me, it's just really easy for your brain to come up with those color combinations. All right, so then my next colorful palette, you might disagree with me on, but to me this is a colorful palette, but it's not a bright colorful palette, but it's still colorful. So I actually picked out from Udenzai the Norns palette. This is their bigger, I think it's 16 shades, is it? Let's see, yeah, it's 16 shades. Sometimes I get like nervous about my mathing skills. Anyway, this is what this palette looks like on the inside, so you can see what I mean. Like, it is still, in my opinion, colorful. Like, you have these really interesting like blue and greens and golds down here, and they definitely, some of them, like especially these two, have like an interesting shift or like a flip to them, like they're like a duochrome. But then you also have this really nice like matte, or not matte, I was about to say a matte shimmer red, a shimmery red that is very pretty, and you've got like this pink chameleon shade. While it just looks like a white shade in the pan, it definitely has a pink, green, gold flip to it. So yeah, even though this does lean very dark and it does have some browns in it, obviously, I do still classify this as one of my more like colorful palettes, simply because of like the shimmer shades that are in here. And it's like one of those jewel toned kind of colorful palettes, you know? So I think it fits, and I do really like this. This is one of my, well, I only own 2 Udenzai palettes, but I like this one and the other one that I have more than the Alwa 1 palette that I was sent in a mystery box. Alright, so my last colorful palette comes from BH Cosmetics. It's the Lost in Los Angeles, and you might be a little bit surprised because I've went on and on about how like, oh, pastels make me sick, and doing an all pastel look, it just never looks right on me. But I have, since this has re-entered my collection, I have found a new appreciation for this. So again, I still don't come in here to do like a full-on look. Maybe we'll do that in the spring. We'll play around and do an all pastel look using this palette, but for right now, I do see this more as a companion palette, but the shimmer shades in here are so bright and so fun. I really don't have anything like them in my collection. Like, I do think this palette does serve a purpose. And how I've been liking to use the matte shades within here is when I do go in with like a very dark matte shadow, and then I can dip into here, find like its counterpart or like a complementary color and help blend it out better. So this has quickly become one of my like favorite kind of go-to palettes in order to help me, you know, create the looks that I want to. It's not like something I use every day or dip into all the time, but much like with the Glamlight Cake palette, like this is the only rainbow palette I need. This is kind of like the only rainbow like pastel palette that I need. Alright, so let's do my top 3 like drugstore / affordable. Like, it's a really subjective term, so how I decided what to me was like affordable / drugstore was, 1, can you find it on the left hand side of Ulta? Because I don't know about y'all, but every Ulta I have ever been into, you walk in and it's like, to the left is the drugstore and to the right is the high end. So, is it available on the left hand side? And then 2, is it under $20? Just because I feel like that's kind of a good cutoff point. So that's how I made the decisions to pick these 3 palettes. But anyway, the first one that I will show you is, again, BH Cosmetics. You're going to see them quite a lot. I think you see them twice within this category alone. They just have one of my most favorite eyeshadow formulas from the drugstore. So this is the Blueberry Muffin palette, and the background of this is, again, holographic. So the camera might struggle just a little bit to read this color story, but I don't think anyone is surprised that I'm picking this as one of my top favorite drugstore palettes. I just cannot get enough of this palette. It is so fun to play with. It is really the palette that got me into blue shades. Like, I really think that if you are someone who is out there and you're like, I want to try blue shades, but I don't want like the ColourPop Blue Moon or, you know, the Menagerie Well song or something like that, where it's those really bold, intimidating blues. I feel like this is your best bet, because you will get some of these like more neutral shades and they just look like brown shadows, but honestly they're more of like a plummy brown, and so they do pair really nicely with these blues. And then the shimmers in here are really fun, and I feel like the shimmer shades within this palette, now you do have like this blue and this blue for sure, but most of the shimmer shades in here are just like nice, like neutral colored shimmers. And so that's also, in my opinion, going to make it easier to play around with those more like colorful matte shadows, because you're going to have like the comfort zone of like just a neutral shimmer. Alright, so then my second palette that I've chosen from the drugstore is from BH Cosmetics. It's the Passion in Paris palette. This one, like these two are neck and neck. I don't know what it is about them, but I just, every time I dip into them, I'm so happy and pleased with the way my look comes out. So my absolute favorite shade in this palette is this red right here. I feel like on camera it just looks like a red shade, and you might be like, well, why are you so excited about that? But it's not like a brick red or like a bright red or like a traditional like primary color red. It has like this cool toneness about it, and it's almost like leaning into like the purple side of things, which kind of makes sense because this palette does overall have like a kind of purple vibe in my opinion. But it's so pretty and so interesting, and it's really easy to work with that shade. And honestly, between this and the next palette we're going to talk about that has a red in it, these are the two like red shadows that have made me love and appreciate red eyeshadow. So, but yeah, I just can't get over this palette. Much like with the Blueberry Muffin, it's just effortless. Now this one is like a little bit more darker and a little bit more intimidating, I think. A lot of the shimmer shades within here do lean more on that darker side, but I still feel like it's a very fun palette, and I have gotten a lot of good looks out of it. Alright, so the last drugstore palette that we're going to talk about is, I keep like holding palettes backwards. I know you guys were waiting for it. You knew I couldn't do this video without including this one. How many times have I raved about the Juvia's Place, the Festival palette? This would be, hands down, my favorite Juvia's Place palette if I had to rank them all. I just think this is such an unsung hero. How many times can I say that every time I show off this palette? But it's so true. So like I was saying with the Passion in Paris, how the red shade in here is more on that like cool tone, kind of purple leaning red. This palette has a more traditional matte red, like what you would think of when someone says like, oh, I'm gonna put on red eyeshadow. But it's really it's been fun to work with, and I think that the color story of this palette is what has really made the red so easy to work with. Now, when I see other people talk about this, I hear them say like, oh, you know, the color story just doesn't do it for me. Like, I don't get it. Like, it confuses me. And I can see that, but I honestly think that this is one of their most interesting color stories, as well as one of their like easiest color stories to work with. And one shadow that I really appreciate that I wish more palettes had, instead of having a matte black eyeshadow, they have like a black shimmer shadow down here. So to me, what I have found is it's much easier to put this matte shimmer in my outer V to get that like depth and that darkness that I want. But then since it's a shimmer shade, it's easier to blend in and kind of melt in a lighter shimmer shade into it. You know, it's harder to blend a shimmer shade into a matte shadow than it is blending like a shimmer into a shimmer or a matte into a matte. So I just really appreciate that this palette does have that. Alright, so now we're going to move on into my high-end palettes. Now, I'm not going to feature any indie brands in this because I did pick out like 3 specific indie palettes that I wanted to share with you because I wanted to spotlight them. Like, I feel like indie deserves its own category, right? So basically how I like came up with high end is much like at the drugstore. Like, can you buy it at Sephora? Is it on the left or is it on the right hand side of Ulta? Does it cost more than $20? That's how I came to the conclusion to pick these. And honestly, I think out of all of the categories that we have done, picking out my high-end eyeshadow palettes was the easiest. Like, these were just the first 3 that came to mind, and then I came and sat down and like opened them and I was like, yep, these are my 3 favorites. So we will get right on into it. I think the first one is going to surprise you. It's the Urban Decay Naked Wild West. I was really surprised that this was one of the palettes that came to mind first when thinking of like my top like high-end palettes. So this is not a palette that I like even thought of or like wanted, but I was gifted it for Christmas and it has just quickly become a favorite out of all of the Naked palettes. Now, the Naked Honey was really nice too, I do have to say that, but out of all of the Naked palettes, like in my opinion, this one does actually go quite dark, and all of these matte shades are really nice. Especially one of my favorites is this last one, this Pony Up shade, which is kind of like a gray purple shade. So typically like darker matte shadows are harder to formulate, at least like in my experience. So I'm really impressed that they were able to get these shadows to work and they blend well, and I don't find them to be patchy. I feel like I can build them up and layer them quite nicely. My only real complaint with this palette, much like with every Naked palette, is that it always never fails that like the first like 4-ish shadows really come across samey, and especially on your eyes. So I really wish Urban Decay would like quit putting all of this neutral in the first half of the palette and then, you know, doing like more fun stuff at the bottom. Like, I get it. It is a Naked palette. They're gonna have some browns and some like neutral type shades in there. But between these first 3 mattes right here, we did not need all 3 of those. You know what I mean? So, but I do still really enjoy this palette. Alright, so my next 2 palettes, they have very reflective packaging, so I apologize for that because they're going to catch in the ring light. But the first one I want to show you is the Zendo palette by Natasha Denona. Let me open this up. I feel like this palette was a really dividing like palette that she released. Like, you either loved it or you hated it. And for me particularly, I just loved it. I think this is so nice. I feel like the shadows in here are more on the muted side. Like, they're not a bunch of poppy shimmers. Like, it's just like it's like if you made a really colorful palette and then you kind of like turned down the saturation, you know? But I have had a lot of fun with this, and I really love that this palette is a mix of warm tones and cool tones. Now, I'm not going to lie to you, I do get way more use out of this like cool toned earthy side than I do out of the warm tone side. But I am going to push myself this month that when I do pull for this palette, I'm not going to just stay in this corner. Like, I am going to use some of these shades. But I do have to say, like, this matte brown and this like golden shade up here are super nice. So I cannot wait to see what else this palette offers. Like, it's just been a fun palette to play with, and it's almost like it's one of those palettes that has pushed me out of my comfort zone and made me like think of different color combinations and different ways to like wear eyeshadows. All right, so then my last high-end palette to show you is also from Natasha Denona. This is the Retro palette. You know, before I would have told you that Metropolis was my favorite out of the Natasha Denona palettes that I have. But now that I have this in my life, I don't know, it's hard. It's hard. Don't let Metropolis know that I'm thinking about dethroning it for this one. But this is just such a great monochromatic palette in my opinion, and I do think it is monochromatic. It does lean very heavy on like the berry pink side, but I just love it so much. And even though it is more monochromatic, I feel like there are just endless looks that I can do within this palette. It has just been a lot of fun to reach for. This is also one of those palettes, kind of like the Persona one, where I can just sit down and kind of mindlessly do my makeup, and I know that my eyeshadow is going to look good and flawless and like really put together. And that for me, like, if I feel like my eyeshadow just like the colors didn't blend well, or it looks kind of choppy, or I just didn't, you know, put good colors together, like I just don't feel good about my makeup. But when my eyeshadow looks good, like I could have like the worst bronzer, blush, and highlighter combo on, but I don't care as long as my eyeshadow looks good. So this is one of those palettes that I get that from, and I am just excited to play around with this and explore it more as the year goes on. I really like her cream to powder formula. I know some people can't really, like, they just don't like it, and that's fine. What I have found though is that, okay, so I go in more with like one of two brushes, like ones like these where it's, you've got your more domed pencil, or like a smaller kind of denser blending brush. I feel like if you use either one of these two types of brushes with her cream to powders, and you do a packing on motion and place that shadow where you want it, and then take your brush and like blend out the edges, and you have to do smaller blending motions. You can't do those like huge windshield wiper streaks. Like, I feel like that's what makes those cream to powder shadows work. So hopefully if you have one of her palettes and you've been struggling with that formula, hopefully those tips help you. Alright, so then we've done drugstore, we've done high-end, so now it's time for the indie palettes to shine. I absolutely love finding like new indie brands, new fun things. I feel like the benefit of an indie brand is that they are willing to push the boundaries more with like color story and like different concepts like that. So I really appreciate that, and have gotten really, you know, it's just been a lot of fun to like play around with those more interesting color stories. And I feel like within indie brands, you just see a lot more variety within palettes than you do at like this standard, like, you know, Ulta, Sephora type palettes. So anyway, my first indie palette that I absolutely love is from Give Me Glow Cosmetics. It is the Christmas Morning palette. I think this is one of their older palettes. Like, this one has been around for quite some time, if I'm not mistaken. But this is so pretty. And I know I just got done saying like, oh, I feel like indie brands really like push the boundaries with like their palettes. So this one, to a lot of people, I feel like would be just like a standard neutral palette. And I get that. I can see that. It is a little bit golden brown, kind of heavy. But the shimmer shades in here, like especially this silver and then this green one up here. This green one is really interesting. Like, it has, like, I wouldn't call it a duochrome necessarily, but it definitely goes from like green to like almost a kind of like purple black shift. Like, it's just really interesting. I think like sponsored from the ABH Jackie Aina palette, if you're familiar with that. Anyway, a lot of these shimmer shades within here are what push the boundary for me, like with this palette. So I do really like it. The shimmers in here as well, they are those type where it looks like you foiled your eyeshadows, but you really didn't. So I really like that about them. They are like very intense and very in your face. I will say though that the Give Me Glow matte formula is a bit more on the drier side, kind of like Juvia's Place. Not as dry as Juvia's Place, but on that, like, you know, within that kind of realm. And so you do have to spend a little bit more time and be a little bit more patient to like blend these out and get these shadows exactly where you want them. But I have really enjoyed this, and I am going to keep my eye on Give Me Glow and see what else they release like throughout the year. Because yeah, I've really enjoyed this. It's just none of their other palettes have like spoken to me or been like a color story that I want. Alright, so then the next indie palette, these next two are quite new into my collection, like compared to a lot of these other palettes, but they have just quickly become favorites. Like, they're both palettes where like I'll be laying in bed at night and then I'll be like that is the palette that I want to use tomorrow, and be thinking of like the different looks that I want to use. So this is the Batty Bean, I finally said it right, palette that she did with Shroud, the It's Freaking Bats palette. This is actually what I am wearing on my eyes today. I think this is one of the most interesting color stories that I have ever seen, like a brand or like an influencer or someone like that come out with. I just think this is so fun, and I know it looks kind of like a little bit chaotic, but actually the more that I have played around with this, the more I have found that these shadows do work really well together. You just have to kind of like be brave to do it. You know what I mean? Because I know not a lot of us are out there playing with like some chartreuse kind of like limey green shades. But yeah, it has just been a lot of fun. One of my absolute favorite shades within here is Zero. It's kind of like a purpley blue pink golden color. Like, it has so much dimension and so much shift to it, and I really do enjoy the Shroud formula, so I'm really happy to have this palette in my collection and keep playing with it. Alright, so then the last indie palette that I will show you, again, is one of those where it's new into my collection, but I can't get it out of my head. I don't know what it is, but it's the Frosty Flamingo by Sugar Drizzle. So I think this is such a pretty 9-pan monochromatic palette. This has it's been so fun. I feel like even though it's 9 pans and monochromatic, like, it's not limiting like you would think. I feel like a lot of times when you get like 9-pan palettes and they're monochromatic, it's a lot of the shades end up kind of being samey. Like, did we really need both of those, you know, browns or both of those purples within the palette? But not with this one. Like, everything in here has a place and a purpose, and it gives you a totally different effect on your eye. And I will say, this bottom shade here, it's called Pinkaberry. It is a multi-chrome eyeshadow. I don't know, I think maybe you can kind of see it if I do this. It goes from like green, gold to like pink. It is just so fun. That is absolutely my most favorite shadow in this palette, and it kind of has like a squishy feel to it, like a Super Shock shadow almost. So yeah, I'm just really excited to see what other things this brand comes out with. I have just been, you know, pleased to death that I like found this. Like, it was one of those things, like, I picked that palette up on a whim, and so I'm really happy that it's become such a favorite. All right, 2 more categories. So I don't have a lot of like bigger palettes, like think like 20 plus shades, but I do have like a lot of smaller mini / like companion style eyeshadow palettes, so I did want to include that category. So the first one is from Natasha Denona. This is the mini Xenon eyeshadow palette that she came out with sometime at the end of 2021, if I'm not mistaken. And I know you guys are looking at this palette and you're thinking like, Haley, why did you buy this? But I really wanted a very nice matte black, which I got from this palette. I wanted a matte white, and then I wanted some nice like gray tones. I feel like a lot of the gray tones that I have in my collection are on the more like lighter kind of cool tone side. Like, I know most grays are cool tone, but it's just something about them, like they're not exactly this kind of gray, if that makes sense. So I have greatly enjoyed like adding this palette into my collection. Like I said, this is more of like a companion palette. I'm usually only dipping into this for like 1, maybe 2 shades at a time, but I have done a look with this where I used both of these gray eyeshadows and then deepened it up with the black, and then used the shimmer in the middle and did like a halo eye, and it was so pretty. I actually, like, there are times where I'm like thinking about it in bed and I'm like, I need to pull this back out and do that look again, because I just had so much fun with it. Alright, so my other like mini palette that I just absolutely love, it has become like a really nice staple companion palette for me, is from Juvia's Place. This is one of their Rebel quads. This is the Army one. I have 3 of them. I have the Mints, the Honey, and the Army, and this one is definitely the one that I get the most use out of. I really love the green shimmers in here. Like, I will reach into those far more than I do the green mattes, but this darker, like kind of foresty green matte, I do reach into it quite a bit. This one is more, like, I feel like it kind of looks like an army green on camera and in the pan, but when you use it, it's much more of like a kind of gray green. Like, it's a really interesting color. I'm still playing around with it and figuring out how I best like to use this one, but I think this is a great, for me, like complimentary. I have a lot of green eyeshadows. It's not like I needed to be out here buying more, but I feel like the shimmers and the mattes within this palette are greens that I did not have represented in my collection. And so anytime I'm pulling for a palette to do a green look, I do pull this one out. Now, I don't always use it with those palettes, but I do like to look at it and really make sure, like, is this something that I want to use to like help deepen up or like make my eye look a little more interesting. So I've greatly enjoyed this one, and their formula on these little quads matches what you would find in like their 9-pan or bigger palettes. Some of those I've tried, the Sweet Pinks, the Violets, the Blush Rose, and the I Live, I Love, I Ice, all of those 6-pan palettes. I don't think those are the same like Juvia's Place quality, the same formula. I would steer clear of those 6 pans if you just wanted my opinion. All right, so my last like little companion palette. Now this one, I will say, those other two, well, no, because I did do a few, I did do a full-on look with the Xenon. I would not use the Juvia's Place quads, any of them, to do like a full-on eye look, but I would use the mini Xenon. And then this one, even though it is like a companion palette and I have used it more often to pair it with other palettes, I have done like a full-on just solid look from this palette and really gotten a lot of enjoyment out of it. So this is the Citrine palette that BH Cosmetics came out with last year for their Birthstone line. So this was for the month of November. This is just a really pretty fall palette. I absolutely love the yellows in here. And again, I really like that within this palette, you kind of have like the matte version and then the shimmer version. So obviously there's the yellows right there. And then this shimmer and this brown are more of like those darker kind of brown shades. So I know like it's not a spot on like shimmer to matte like dupe. But you can get those like monochromatic looks if that's what you're looking for. And then this red and this brown up here does lean more to like the red side of things. So I've just really enjoyed this. I don't use like the pressed glitter. I have 3 other of these palettes and I'm not using the pressed glitters. Sorry. I just don't trust it. Don't want to fool with it. So I do only see this as like a 6-pan palette, but I have really enjoyed this and I'm glad that I like added this into my collection. All right, if you made it to the end, you made it this far, it's the last category, and I feel like this is the category that's going to make people the most mad. So I just couldn't help it because these 3 palettes were palettes that I wanted to talk about, but I didn't feel right talking about them because they're discontinued and you can't get them, but they're still some of my favorite palettes. So I decided to show you my 3 most favorite discontinued palettes, and if you hate me, I'm very sorry, and if you want to click out of the video now, that's fine. My feelings are not hurt, but I'm still going to show them to you. So my first one, I cannot find this on the ABH website anymore. This is the palette that they did with Jackie Aina. I love this. I cannot stop like thinking about this eyeshadow palette. This is what it looks like on the inside, and obviously you can see I do have a lot of pan in here. This has just been such a fun palette. I really feel like this is a good all year round palette. Now it does give me much more like fall toned kind of vibes, but a lot of these pinks and purples will be really nice to use in February, and then a lot of these like golden kind of shades and these browns I could see being really nice in like the summer, so you get like a lot of fun bronzy looks. But I've tried a lot of ABH palettes. I've tried Modern Renaissance, I had Subculture, I had the Prism, I'm sure I've had something else that I'm forgetting, but this is the only one that has like survived within my collection. It is the only one that I would genuinely be sad if something happened to this. I just think she did such a great job, and yeah, the looks and the variety of this palette are just endless. Alright, so the second discontinued palette, I feel like you're just going to hate me more and more as we go down the line, right? So, the Natasha Denona Metropolis palette, I don't know, like it's just a plain background. Why was I going to have to show that to you? This was a holiday palette from 2019, if I'm not mistaken. Believe it was 2019. I just absolutely love this as far as like larger eyeshadow palettes go. I feel like this is a great year-round palette. Like that was one reason why I chose to get this one, was that I felt like, one, her palettes are pricey, let's admit it, So they're kind of like an investment. Like, you really have to think about it. Like, am I going to use this and get that $129 worth out of it? So this one to me was her most like everyday, like wearable, all year round kind of palette. I've just absolutely fallen in love with this one. Now obviously you can see there's way more usage on this green golden grungy side. That is not surprising. Haley loves her greens. But this year I am challenging myself to branch out and use more of this edge of the palette. And it's not that like this is the untouched side, never been used. Like, I have used it. It's just when I pull this palette out, what do I more prefer to wear? These kinds of shades. But I am really happy to have this in my collection. I am really glad that I snagged it before it like was gone. So all right, now that I'm talking about all these discontinued palettes, I feel a little bad, but that's okay. Here we are. Let's talk about the last one. I feel like this one is going to be the one that you hate me the most over. So it's the Kaleidos Club Nebula palette that I'm holding upside down, that they did in collaboration with Angelica Nyqvist. So I just really love this. I don't know. This came out in January of 2021. And at first, like after I bought it and it was on its way to me, I was like, Haley, you made such a mistake. Like, you did not need that palette. You are never going to use that. That is just, this color story is so not you. But then I got it, and it's really the palette that I have to credit to for wanting to be adventurous and play with color and like figure out different color combinations and things like that. So I think honestly this would probably be one of my top 3 palettes within my whole collection. And I do feel like the best thing about this palette that I have to say is that every shade within this palette goes together. You can take any combination of these shadows that you want, make them into an eye look, and it's going to look good. I feel like a lot of times in palettes you find like, all right, these like 4 shades go really well together, and then these other 4 shades, and then this one shade in the middle, like it's really nice, but it only goes with this other one shade in the corner. You know what I mean? Not with this palette. Like, every single time I've even tried to make a bad eye look. Like, I'm not gonna lie to you, because I was like, is it just possible? And it's not. Every time I go in here and I pair like something that I just wouldn't normally pair together, it still ends up looking so nice and so flawless. So this is definitely one of my most favorite palettes, and so it's definitely one of my most favorite discontinued palettes. I really wanted to add the Club Nebula one either into my indie category or my colorful category, but I didn't, like, as I was sitting down to like think about this, I was like, I don't really want to show discontinued palettes. But then I was like, well, I'll just make their own category for it. So hope you're not too mad. Hope we can still be friends. But that was it. I thank you guys so much. I'm sure this video was on the longer side because we like to ramble. But let me know what your top 3 palettes would be. Either like within your whole collection or by category. Or, you know, if you want to film this too, then please do, because I would love to see it. I just love talking about eyeshadow palettes, if that's not apparent. So I hope you guys are having a good day, a good night, or a good whatever, and I will catch you in the next one. Bye.